We're starting the first project in InDesign. We're going to be making a stationery piece for our client. This is called a letterhead that you would create a business letter on. And we are going to be saving it differently from the way the book has you do it. They want you to actually print it out using a printer, but we're going to be doing a PDF and it will look very much like this when you are finished. This is called printer's mark that a print shop would use to help determine if the color is correct. And these are called printer's marks here. That's where the paper would be cut. So it's going to look like this when you're finished. So pay attention to the end of this video on how we're going to be saving. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and watch the first video that I have on how to set up InDesign. We're going to go ahead and say New File. This little dialog will open. Click Print. And the first one is going to be a basic size of a letter, so click on that. We're going to go ahead and change this to inches. So that is a standard piece of paper. Let's go ahead and name this Roberts GMC letterhead. Make sure to unclick facing pages. We're going to have one page, start with one column. All of this is fine. Now go down to where it says margins, and you may have to open it up right here. Mine was already open. Now margins are the white areas around the edge of a piece of paper. We never need to print things directly to the edges unless we want bleed. Now we've talked about bleed before. But as far as margins go, margins is the edge of the paper that the actual machine of the printer will grab and hold on to pull the piece of paper through. So you have to have margins. And you should never do designs straight up to the edge of a piece of paper unless you are going for bleed. So make sure that this is unchecked because we're going to have different margins. So unlock it. The top margin needs to be 2 inches. The bottom needs to be 1.75. The left is going to be 0.75. And the right is going to be 0.75. So for bleed, do make sure that they are all clicked together. This printer is asked for 0.125 bleed. So anything that needs to be printed all the way to the edge of the paper has to go out to that 1.25 bleed line. Slug is something that you might have seen that at the very beginning where those little teeny pieces, those little teeny boxes of color were. Slug is just something that is on the outside of the bleed lines that you can use to leave notes for the printer. Sometimes when you look at newspapers and magazines, you accidentally see things that are left in the slug. So slug can be set to 0 for this particular one. And you can go ahead and click Create. Now these margins on this particular letterhead are really, really small down here. And the reason is, if you think about the way letterhead is, this is the part where somebody is actually going to be able to type something. So we're going to leave that empty for our client to be able to type a letter in. So it's just to let us know we need to put all our design either up here in the header or in the footer because we need to leave this area blank for them to use actually to write their letters. So now you have that set up. Let's go ahead and save it. Put it in your work in progress folder with your last name. So last name GCM letterhead, and it will be an INDD, which is an InDesign document. Now before we get started, everybody go to the Essentials Classic Workspace. Now you may have already done this in the Getting Ready video, but we need to add some things to this that aren't already here. So let's go to Window, Properties, and make sure Properties is there. Window, Type in Tables, Character, and I'm going to put my character right there. And we also need Type and Tables, Paragraph. That should be all the things that we need for this chapter. Now I go up to View, Guides, and make sure your smart guides are on. We use those in Illustrator, so they should be on by default. Also go into View, Show Rulers. And Rulers is going to leave these little rulers up at the top. What is great about them is they can be used to make guides. So if you click and drag your mouse down, you can see that it's making a little guide like this. Those are used for us to kind of set things up, and they will not print. They are just there for guides. So click and drag one down, and we need to put this at 2.5. So I want you to look over here on this edge. Do you see that it's showing me where it's going to be? So I can put it at 0.25 right there, and I know that it's at 1/4 of an inch. Now look at this, I'm getting it's a little hard for me to get it exactly on 25. That's okay, go ahead and drop it if you have a hard time like I do. And then you can just fix it up here in this contextual panel. So it needs to, oop, it didn't click right. +2.5, there you go. So that one's exactly on there. Now let's go click and drag down. We're going to get another one. This one needs to go 1/4 from the bottom. So that will be at 10.75. Once again, you can kind of put your mouse over here to see when you're getting close. 10.75. And drop that guide there. That's telling us we need to not put anything past those little guides. Now let's do the ones on the left and the right. So grab one from the left over here in your rulers, and we're going to pull it over. And you can see up here it's showing us where it's going to at 0.25. Once again, if you have a hard time dropping it there, just go ahead and drop it and then change it up here. This one's going to go to 8.25. So now we have all our guides set up. I want you to go to View, Guides, Lock Guides. This way we won't accidentally pick them up and move them away from where they're supposed to be. Go ahead and resave, Control S. Now InDesign makes vector graphics, so you could of course go over and make these graphics in Illustrator, but when we're doing simple vector graphics, it's easier to just make them in here because this has a vector program too. Notice that a lot of the tools that we had in Illustrator are here, like the pen tool. So we just need to draw a straight line. So right here is the line tool. And we're going to make sure that we are in the default. InDesign defaults to have no fill and a black stroke. If you don't see that, just click this little button right here, which will add it the defaults. So just click here underneath your margin, but click right at the bleed line. And you're going to draw straight across. If you hold the Shift key while you're doing that, you can make sure that you're doing an absolutely straight line. And then let go. And you should have a 1-point black stroke. If we go over to Properties, it tells us exactly where they are, and it tells us our length 8.75, and it's a 1-point stroke. So we're going to change that to a 2-point stroke. Remember, this is still selected, so it should change that. It's now a 2-point stroke. And you remember that our paper is 8.75 inches. If yours is not exactly 8.75 inches, you can go ahead and change it right here. Now the X and Y is where this exists on the page. So let's put it exactly where we need to put it. It should be at 9.75. I got pretty close. So let's just type in 9.75 to make sure that's exactly where it needs to be. So we have our length is 8.75. We are 2 points in stroke, and we are at 9.75 inches for Y. Now we're going to grab our pen tool and we're going to add some extra points to this. Now the book wants us to put an extra point at the 4.5 mark. So what is good about this is when you are putting this on the screen, do you see up here at the top, it's telling us exactly when we get to the right point. So we want to be at 1.5, which would be right there. So if we add a point at 1.5, that's going to be right there. So we've added an extra point. Now we need to add another one at 6. Make sure that your line is still selected. With the pen tool, we're going to put one at 6. Now select off of that line. With the direct selection tool, we're going to go grab this point that was made between this anchor point and this anchor point. Do you see that it's kind of separated now? So we need to move that down, but we want to make sure we're going in a straight line. With your direct selection tool, you're going to drag down until you see it say 10.2. And let go. So with our same direct selection tool, we're going to grab this second point. Now right now you can see that it says that that point is at 4. Yours is going to be somewhere different, but this is telling us exactly where the point is. We actually want to move over a little bit. So this is showing you how you control that. Instead of wherever you have yours, the book wants us to put it at 4.875. Do you see it moved that line over a little bit? Okay, so it's kind of looking like a file folder. We now need to change these to Bezier curves instead of straight lines. The way that we do that is with the Convert Point tool, and it is hidden underneath your pen tool. So you can either right click or click and hold down and get the Convert Direction Point tool. So we're on this second little anchor point. We're going to click and drag to the right. Now we want to make sure we go straight to the right, so make sure to hit Shift. Click and drag to the right, and you can look up at the top and wait until it says 5.625. So you can either look up at the very top to watch that little white line, or also you can look up at the very, very corner, and do you see it's telling me that the X is at 5.625. When you see it in the right area, let go. So we've made a little curve. Now we need to do the same thing with this last point. So with your direct selection tool, select the third point on the line, and it will turn blue. Get your Convert Anchor tool, click, hold Shift, and go to the right until that line is at 6.5. So we've got a cool little curve. Now grab your selection tool and click anywhere off of that. Let's go ahead and save. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and we're going to connect all of these. So let's get the pen tool back and click that click where you think that first little line is. Do you see it's now selected that one point? That means that we have that first point selected, and we can now connect them all. So just click once at the bottom of the bleed, and you see it's continuing our line. I'm going to use my space bar to get over here and join them. Do you see that little round O thing that it's made? That's telling me it's going to join them. So now we have a complete shape. If you're following along with the book, this next part might be confusing. So I'm just going to do something really quick to kind of explain why it's doing that. If I make a 1 by 1 inch rectangle, and don't follow me, I'm just kind of teaching you something. And let's say it has a 10 point stroke on it. So this is supposed to be a 1 square inch little box. But if I go look at properties, it actually says that the dimensions of this is 1.125 inches. That might be a really big problem if we were doing something very detailed or if we're doing something for architecture. So we need to know the size of this box with the stroke on it, or do we want it to be with or without the stroke? So what they have you doing in here is you're going to go to the end of this control panel that shows up down here. You're going to click right here on this hamburger menu. And do you see that it says dimensions include stroke weight? We're going to turn that off. If you look at it now, the reason that it's done this is because my stroke is going on the inside. So if I want to make sure that that's actually a 1 inch square, I would have to change it now. So now it is 1 inches plus whatever is in the stroke. So I hope that makes sense. So let me kind of back up here. What we're going to do is we're going to go over here to the little hamburger menu and make sure dimensions include stroke weight. Because if you look down here in this box that we've made, do you see that that's actually going outside of our bleed? Because our box is ending on the bleed, but our stroke is going outside the bleed. So now that you've got that turned off, we can do this right. Make sure this is selected And then we're just going to flip these so that now black is on the inside and white. There is nothing on the outside. So we have no stroke. If you look back on this edge again, it's now exactly perfect. So I hope that made sense. So now we need to open up the color panel. It should be right here if you're in the same workspace as I am. If you can't find it, just go to Window, Window, and then find the color and turn it on. Mine is right here. So if we're clicking right here, we're dealing with the fill. If we're clicking right here, we're dealing with the stroke. Make sure that you have fill clicked on. Then go to the hamburger menu and let's make sure that we are in CMYK. So just click on CMYK. And it's showing us all this. You can see it is pure black, so it has no cyan, no magenta, no yellow, and 100% black ink. We're just going to make some changes. So for the C, we want to type in 85. You can hit the tab and go down to the magenta. For magenta, we need to have 50. Tab. For Y, we need to say 85. And then tab again. Down in K, we need to do 40. So now we kind of have this green that, let's say that is the color that our client had asked us specifically to do. So now we're going to add that to our swatches. If you click back up in the hamburger menu, you're going to say add to swatches. If we go look at our swatches menu, which should be right underneath color, you will see that here is the new one that we have just made. 8550, 8540. So we've made our own custom swatch. Let's go ahead and save, Control S. So now we're going to put some little frames down here that we can add some photos to. So make sure you're not on this little selected box anywhere with your selection tool. Just click anywhere in the gray. And now we're going to go grab this rectangular frame tool. So just click once anywhere on the screen and shift and drag down until you see that it is 1.25 tall and wide. Because we're hitting shift, it's going to make it an actual square. Now, if you couldn't get it exactly 1.5, you could go up here and say, type in 1.25 and make sure that it's the size that the book wants it to be. We've now made a rectangular frame. And it kind of doesn't matter where it is on the screen right now. Let's put it in the right place. So let's go up here to the control panel. And you see this is telling us, it's giving us where mine is on the screen. Yours is going to be a little bit different. But it's all in reference to this one point right here. We want this to be at the bottom, so I'm going to reference this bottom point. So click that little tiny button and you see it's now giving us what the XY coordinates are at the bottom left-hand corner of that square. So the book wants us to be at 1 inch on the X and 9 on the Y. So what we just told it is, I want this little point down here that I'm pointing to be at 1 inch and 9 inches in the X and Y coordinates. Now grab your selection tool and make sure this is selected. And we can make copies of it just like we did in Illustrator. So just Alt, click, and drag your mouse and it's going to make an exact copy over to the right of it. So we've made 2 of them. Now another way that you can make copies is we're going to make a third one. So this is just a different way to do it. Object, transform again, and then say transform again. So it's going to do that exact same thing that we just did again. Then the last way it wants us to know that we can do this is to say edit, duplicate. So it just was showing you several different ways that you can make boxes. So just make 4 boxes and I think you'll be good. The last one you can do however you want. I'm just going to say edit, duplicate again. So we should have 5 boxes. Go ahead and save. Now if you follow along with the book, this part can be really confusing. So hopefully I can make it easier. With the selection tool, we want to grab all 5 of these. So just click and drag until you get all 5 of them selected at one time. So we need to tell InDesign that we want to be able to see what we're doing as we're doing it. So we're going to go to where our preferences are. So on PCs, it's in Edit Preferences. On Macs, that will be in your Macintosh window. Go to the Interface section, and down here in Options, we want to say Immediate. And all we're just telling it is, as we make changes, I want to see them immediately. So go ahead and say OK. And we should be able to do this next part. So what you're going to do is grab right here on this little middle right hand. You're going to click it first and then hit the space bar. And as you drag it, it's going to make them closer together. If you hadn't hit the space bar, it would have changed the size of each individual thing. So hitting the space bar will make them change the spaces between them. So click until you see all the spaces gone. Now I find that you have to kind of zoom in to see if you've done it. Looks like I did not quite do it, so I'm going to try again. Start dragging first, then hit your space bar. There we go. Now I've got mine perfect. So once again, hitting the space bar is telling it, I want you to take all 5 of these things that I selected and change the space between each of them. So this time we want to change all 5 of them in the actual space. We want to change all of them at the same time, but not the spaces. We want to change the actual little boxes. So click that again, and this time don't hit space bar. And drag until you see that the width of the whole thing is 5.5. So we're saying this whole group we want to be 5.5 inches. And let go. So we've made these the right size. You can see this time it made them a little bit thinner. So let's group all these together. You can either go up to Object, Group, or right-click and just say Group. So this is now all one thing. We haven't really looked at the Layers menu yet, but if you go into the Layers menu, you can see that this that we have selected is actually a group. So here is this group, and then here's the path we made down at the bottom that made a shape. And you, of course, could change the name of these, but that's the one that we're on, and you can see this is how we know we're selected. And of course, we have the little eyeballs like we did in Illustrator. So now we need to align this. You can do basic alignment right up here, or we could open up the Align tab. The book has us opening up the Align tab, so we'll go ahead and do it that way, but you could always do it right here. So I don't have Align open yet. I'm going to go to Window, Object and Layout, Align. And I'm going to go ahead and pick this up and pull it over here so we don't lose it if we need to use it later. So in the Align panel, obviously if we wanted to just center this, we could do all these things. Do realize that it has this right here. What do you want to align it to? The selection itself, the page, spread, margins, all these different choices. So we want to align it, but we actually want to align it with what we've got down here already. So we have this selected already. We now hit Shift and select the green thing at the bottom that we made. Now when we say Align To, we are saying we want these 2 selected things to be aligned to each other. With all of those selected, we can click this first one to align them to the left. You see they're both aligned. And then we need to align to the bottom, which is this button. So it took those and aligned them down there with what we've got. So make sure this is selected. Remember, this is an entire group. And we're going to go and add a 3-point stroke. And you can see that we now have, it had nothing in it before, but now it is a stroke. We need to change the color of that stroke. So click on this little drop-down menu. And I did want to explain to you, if you were to say we want no stroke, that's not going to be white. If you say none, it literally means none, like you could see things through it. White in InDesign is paper. Because think about this, if this was printing, we don't need to put white ink over this green ink. We just need to have no ink there. So you're going to say paper to make it white. And because we had this whole thing selected, it made all of them a 3-point white stroke. And we still have none as our fill, which means you would see through to the green ink underneath it. So now I want to change this because this is kind of sticking out right here. So if this is a group, but if I double click right here, do you see just this one is selected? So we're going to make changes just on this one, not on all of them. Open up your properties panel, and you can see it's telling us all these things about it. There's an extra one that you didn't see in Illustrator, which is corner. So what we're saying is we want to change the corners. Now, if you double click on the actual word corner, it's going to pop up the corner options. And we need to make sure it is unlinked because we only want to change one of these corners. We're going to change the one in the upper right because that one's kind of looking out over top of our little curvy thing we made. So we're going to choose what type of corner we want. We want to choose this rounded corner, and we want it to be 0.45. Perfect. Go ahead and hit OK. That looks a lot better. Let's save. Now go ahead and double click on this little hand, and you should go back out so we can see the whole thing. At this point, make sure with the selection tool that nothing is selected. We're going to go place some images. So say File, Place, and go find your files from this week. And we want to grab the one called gmclogo.ai. So this was created in Adobe Illustrator. And you need to click this right here that says Show Import Options. So before you hit Open, make sure you've clicked Show Import Options. And this is going to pop up. So hopefully you can see the difference. If you kind of make some of these choices, it's going to show you, like for instance, the crop, if you wanted to leave a little bit of area around it, you would choose that one. Like it's going to give you different choices of how you want it to do. So just leave it on bounding box and then go to the layers menu right here because you might have a bunch of layers and you just want to show one. Keep layer visibility overrides needs to be on. And we're going to hit OK. And just click up here near the top and it's going to put it on the screen. So we just kind of randomly put it on there. Let's put it exactly where it needs to be. Go into Properties, and we need to be using the upper left-hand corner. Remember, we changed it to the lower right-hand corner. Make sure it's on the upper left-hand corner, and we want that to be at 0.25x and 0.25y. Now we're going to use this frame fitting that I talked about in the last video. Click on Auto Fit, meaning whenever we change whatever we change it to on the frame, I want you to just auto fit it within there. So that's what auto fit is going to do. So we're going to change the frame and it's going to fix that for us. So now with the selection tool, we're going to grab our frame and we're going to drag it up until it's 1.6. Now don't worry how fat it is, just make sure that says 1.6. It can be a little bit fatter. Now let's uncheck that auto fit. Now you can see it did make it smaller, but it hasn't put it in there correctly. And I did explain this in the last video. We now need to kind of tell it. Realize that if you click once, you've got both everything, but if you double click, you've now got what's inside of it. So make sure that you're on the frame when you do this, not on what is inside the frame. Once again, I did explain that. If you didn't watch the first video, you need to go back and watch it. So we're on the actual frame and we're going to click the second button, which is Fit Content Proportionally. And it should look like that. The problem with that is we want it to be at a certain point in here. It doesn't matter how big this frame is. That's the size we want it to be, and that looks good. So if you double click on it, make sure you see that little hand, because that means we're on the actual logo, not on the frame. So we could pick this up and move it around. That's good. But we need to make sure it's exactly where we want it to be. So make sure you're on the top little reference point, and we want X to be at 0 and Y should be at 0 too. So that's exactly where we need it to be. Now the last thing, and this is just kind of something to kind of make it look better, our frame doesn't need to be this big. It's way out here, and if you started making all kind of other things, it could be in your way. We're going to go ahead and click this that says fit the frame to the actual size, because there's no reason for the frame to be bigger. So just go ahead and make your frame the same size. So this is looking like a letterhead. Let's keep going. Go ahead and save. So now we need to put stuff down here in these 5 boxes. I'm going to move on down here. So let's change our fitting options so that we know that they're going to be the same for all of them. So we're going to click right here and go to Object, Fitting, Frame Fitting Options. So we're just going to tell it from now on, this is how I want you to do this. So make sure that instead of the center, we want it to be aligned to the upper left. And we want to choose the bottom one, fill frame proportionally. So if you know that you're going to be using this over and over again and just changing it, you can go ahead and set this up to know every time I go and place something in these boxes. Let's say we come back next month and we've got to change it. It knows that this is how you want it to do it. So we're not going to have to go do it manually every time like we did for the logo. So go ahead and hit OK. Then let's go ahead and get those photos. So File, Place, and go find this week's files. So we need coffee, and then you can hit Control, cream puffs, fruit, peppers, and spices. And now we can uncheck this Show Import Options that we did last time because we don't need to do that this time. Just say Open. And it has loaded them all into this little thing. You can see it says there are 5 there. We can now just go and drop them. So just click once, and it knows how we want them to be fitted already, so it's going to put them perfectly in there. Nice. Control S to save. Now we're going to add type. So let's zoom in just a little bit. Now I explained that for type in InDesign, you have to actually draw a box. So go ahead and get the type tool. And I'm just going to click and drag a box, just make it about this size. And your type should default to be Minion Pro 12 points. Go ahead and type this. Grand Cuisine, period. Grand Culture, period. Grand Central, period. Now let's select this whole text box and make sure we've got it the right size. So make sure that you've selected the box, not the text. So with the selection tool, we've got the text box. And let's go look at the properties for it. So with our reference point in the upper left-hand corner, the X needs to be at 0.25. Y needs to be at 9.5. It needs to be 4.5 inches width. And the height needs to be 0.25 inches. Now grab your type tool and just double click on one of the words. It'll get a word. If you triple click, it'll get the whole sentence. So make sure you've got the whole sentence because we're going to change these fonts. Here in Properties, if you double click on the little T icon, it's going to open this up for you. And we need to make this the same color, that dark green that we made. So go ahead and click on that last one that we made, and it's going to change it to that color. Click away from that, and now we need to change the font itself. So instead of Minion Pro, you can just type in ATC. That, of course, stands for Against the Clock. And it's going to bring up all our Against the Clock. And then we need to do Coral Normal. And you're going to click these little up and down menus. Until you see a little X appear in the bottom. Do you see that little plus sign? What that is telling us is, Amy, you have so much in this text box that I can't see it all. So the book was just teaching you what that means. I'm going to zoom in on it. That's the little thing it's telling us you've got a problem. If you send this to the printer, they're going to get very angry with you because you've cut off some of the stuff. That's the problem with text boxes, but it's good. It's good for us to learn this. So let's click back down one until we get them all in. So mine is at 17 points and it should fit within the size that the book wants us to have it in. Now let's just select anywhere outside with our selection tool to make sure that that is not selected anymore. Double click on the little hand to zoom back out. Now we're going to place something that was already made for us. So go to make sure nothing is selected and go to File, Place. Now go get this one called Contract. That's a RTF file, which means rich text. Make sure all of these things down here are unselected and say Open. Now we need to go and click this about half an inch up from the bottom margin guide. So about half an inch from here, just click once and it's going to drop it there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So just pick it up and drag it down until it snaps to be right on the corners of those guides that we made. Now I know right now it's in the wrong place. We're going to fix it. You're going to grab this upper left-hand corner button, hit Shift and drag it down until it's about that size. So while that is still selected, here in Properties, we need to click on Fill. So just click on the little icon. And right now it's asking us, do you want to apply it to the frame or do you want us to apply it to the text? We want to apply it to the text and we want to make the text paper color. We also need to change how it is in paragraphs. So we also need to change the alignment. So we can do that here in Properties. Right here with Paragraph, we need it to be right justified. Okay, let's save our work and double click on the little hand tool to go all the way back out. You are so close to being done. Now at this point in the book, it wants you to print this out as an actual print on your printer. Obviously you couldn't turn that into me, obviously, because this is an online class. So we're going to print it, but as our printer, we're going to be using Adobe PDF. So go to File, Print. And everybody's is going to look a little bit different. It's going to come up with whatever printers you have. You may not even have a printer. So we're going to choose Adobe PDF. Now this should be on all of yours because you have loaded Adobe. If you haven't, you could Zoom me and I will try to explain this to you, but we're going to use Adobe. So go ahead and click on Adobe. So now let's go to Setup. And it's asking us what size paper we want. Now this would not work to print this on a letter size paper because it is actually letter size. How would we get the bleed? So we would actually, if we sent this to a printer, they would actually have to print it on a bigger sized piece of paper so that they could have bleed. They would then have to cut it right there at that line. So for paper, we're going to choose 11 by 17, which is, it might be called tabloid on yours, that's why they're called the tabloids, 11 by 17. So choose 11 by 17. So you see it's going to be on a bigger size piece of paper. Now the problem with that is we still would not get bleed. So here on page position, I want you to say centered. That way we would be able to get all of our bleed. So for marks and bleeds, because the book wants us to do this, we're going to print out our printer's marks. Now the printers probably won't ask for this, but that's fine. We're going to do it just to show that we understand what it is. So go ahead and click all printer's marks. And you can see it's adding all that extra stuff. Remember, that was called the slug. In output, I want you to choose composite CMYK. And so it's showing us that it's going to make all of this. I do want to explain to you that if it's in composite CMYK, what it means is all the colors that we've created can be created by adding little parts of these four together. For graphics, we're going to say optimize subsampling, and everything else should be pretty good. Now, in summary, it would tell you if you have any mistakes that you need to fix, anything that's not going to print correct. Different printers will give you different choices for all of these things. It's going to tell you, they're going to tell you what they want. You now can click print, and it's going to ask us where to save this print. So I'm going to put mine in my work in progress folder. And I'm going to call this Roberts GMC letterhead.pdf. And I'm going to hit save. So this PDF is what you should turn in to me. All right, you can email me or Zoom me if you need any help, and good luck with your first InDesign project.